The hospital locked down in under 60 seconds. Doors sealed. Signals died. Elevators froze between floors. And Elena realized, too late, that this wasn't an emergency anymore. It was a takeover. Men with guns flooded the ER, their boots echoing like a countdown, dragging a bleeding man on a stretcher behind them. Hawk. The name alone had reshaped neighborhoods, ended lives, turned entire streets into war zones. And now he lay broken, gasping, his survival reduced to the steady hands of the woman who hated what he represented. Keep him alive, one of the guards said coldly, or everyone here pays. At that moment, the hospital stopped being a place of healing. It became an arena. Elena had trained for chaos, for trauma, for impossible odds, but not this. Not surgery under threat of execution. Not saving a man whose empire had poisoned her city. And not while something felt wrong. Too controlled. Too quiet. As if the danger wasn't outside the room, but standing comfortably inside it. As Hawk's vitals faltered and the walls closed in, Elena understood a terrifying truth. This wasn't just about saving a life. Someone wanted Hawk to die, and Elena was standing between a predator and a carefully planned betrayal. If you're hooked, stay with me till the very end of the story. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I've got so many incredible stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. Alright, let's get back to the story. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, before settling into a harsh, sterile hum, the sound magnified against the sudden silence that had fallen over the emergency room. Elena's fingers lingered on the edge of the stainless steel tray, her heart thudding like a jackhammer in her chest. Outside the OR, the usual chatter of pagers and radios had died abruptly, replaced by the low, mechanical click of locks being engaged. The hospital had become a cage. Signal jammers slid into position with methodical precision, their dark panels blinking faintly, as if the building itself were breathing in alarm. Doors that had once swung freely now refused to move, welded from the inside, metal biting against metal with a resonant finality. Even the elevators fell silent, powerless, their polished surfaces reflecting the faces of staff who stared, frozen. Some whispered frantic prayers, some trembled silently. Elena felt both. Then the ambulance bay doors exploded inward with a thunderous crash, and black SUVs poured into the sterile light. Men in tactical gear moved like predators through the ER, their boots heavy, precise, and terrifying. Hawk was between them on a stretcher, a grim bundle of blood and sweat, barely recognizable beneath the hospital gown that hung in tatters. His face, pale and drawn, was still impossibly commanding. Every inch of him exuded danger even on the edge of death. A jagged line of blood streaked across his temple, and his lips twisted into a brief, half-conscious snarl as he struggled for each shallow breath. Elena felt her stomach tighten. This man, Hawk, was a city's nightmare incarnate, and now he was hers to save. The tactical team moved around her with the cold precision of a military unit, checking monitors, scanning the hallways, and repositioning weapons. Their presence was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed against her spine. One of them barked, "Hawk's condition is critical. You keep him alive, or everyone in this building pays." The room smelled of antiseptic and gun oil, a jarring mixture that made Elena's stomach lurch. She tried to focus, tracing the lines of monitors and IVs, noting blood pressure, oxygen, pulse. Each beep was a countdown, each flatline a threat. She glanced at the guards, their faces impassive behind tactical helmets, fingers twitching near triggers, eyes calculating. Even the lights above seemed sharper, accusing, spotlighting her fear. A medic moved to adjust Hawk's intubation tube, and Elena's hands finally lifted. They were steady, at least outwardly, though her chest heaved and her fingers were slick with sweat. She had been trained for trauma, for chaos, but never for this. A warlord's life in her hands, every heartbeat measured against the threat of instant execution. She leaned over him, inhaling the sterile air, willing herself into focus. Black steel, white tiles, red blood, and the soft hiss of life support surrounded her. The hospital had become an arena, and the golden hour had already begun. Outside, the city was oblivious, but inside these walls, Elena understood a truth she would carry forever. Survival was not guaranteed, and the line between doctor and weapon had just vanished. Elena's legs felt like lead as she followed the guards down the narrow corridor, every step echoing against the polished tile. The doors loomed ahead, cold and sterile, swinging open to reveal a room lit with harsh white lights that reflected off stainless steel surfaces. Monitors blinked, IVs dripped methodically, and the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. It should have been familiar, comforting even, but tonight it felt like a trap. Hawk lay on the table, pale and fragile beneath the stark hospital gown, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The sight made Elena's stomach twist. She had grown up in the neighborhood he had turned into a war zone, the streets patrolled by his men, families living in fear while his empire thrived. And now, despite every instinct screaming otherwise, she was being ordered to save him. A guard pressed a cold hand against her shoulder, and she forced herself to step closer. Her gloves were slick with sweat before she even touched the tray, and her hands shook. Not wildly, not enough to drop the scalpel, but enough that she could feel it, a tremor betraying the panic coiling in her chest. She straightened her spine and exhaled slowly, willing calm into her limbs. The men surrounding her were silent but lethal. Any sign of hesitation, and the consequences would be immediate. She glanced at the vitals on the monitor, oxygen dropping, pulse erratic. Every number screamed urgency. Elena picked up the scalpel, her fingers tightening around the handle until the tremor almost vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. She had trained for this. Years of trauma rotations, of saving lives under impossible circumstances, but this was different. This was Hawk, the man who had taken everything from her people, the man whose hands had built a city of fear while her neighborhood crumbled. And now her hands would dig a bullet from his chest. Her mind screamed rebellion even as her body obeyed protocol. One wrong incision, one pause too long, and not just his life, but hers and everyone else's would be on the line. She imagined every street he had burned, every family left in ruin, and yet she steadied her hands. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, precise, even as her pulse raced in her ears. She could feel the eyes of the guards, sharp and unblinking, tracking her every motion. Time seemed to fracture, seconds stretching and snapping back. Elena whispered to herself, a mantra she barely noticed forming in the tension. Focus. One movement at a time. Breathe. The scalpel hovered over Hawk's chest, the smell of blood sharp in her nose. Her fingers quivered imperceptibly, but she forced the motion steady, the incision precise. Every cut, every suction, every movement was a battle against her own anxiety, a duel she couldn't afford to lose. And yet, in the middle of this chaos, as the beeping monitors and the weight of armed men pressed down on her, Elena realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She could do this. Her hands, shaking or not, could save him. And in that moment, she found a fragile clarity amid the storm of fear, a single, unshakable truth. She was the only thing standing between Hawk and death, and she would not falter. The monitors screamed, a high-pitched alarm that pierced the sterile hum of the ore. Hawk's pulse flattened, then fluttered weakly like a trapped bird. Elena's heart slammed against her ribcage, but she forced herself to focus, training every ounce of thought on the man lying before her. The room had shifted. The sterile calm of surgery was gone, replaced by a sharp, tense edge that cut through the air. The guards' impatience became tangible. Weapons were leveled not just at the staff, but at anyone who dared move too slowly, breathe too loudly. One of the nurses froze mid-step, eyes wide, and Elena had to suppress a shiver. She leaned over Hawk, scanning the monitors, tracing the faint flicker of his pulse with a practiced precision that belied the storm of fear in her chest. "Come on, stay with me," she muttered under her breath, voice low but urgent. Her hands moved almost of their own accord, performing the crash procedure she had drilled countless times. The scalpel, clamps, and suction worked together in a precise rhythm, a deadly dance on the edge of chaos. She could feel the tremor returning to her fingers, but she clenched her jaw and pressed it down, letting her focus sharpen until it cut through the fear like a scalpel itself. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, but she ignored it. Hawk's chest was open, the wound bleeding steadily despite the temporary clamps. As she worked, something caught her eye, a subtle residue around the entry point of the bullet, a faint discoloration that didn't match blood or tissue. Her mind, trained to notice anomalies in seconds, zeroed in immediately. She reached for the sample swab, analyzing in the back of her mind. This wasn't just a gunshot wound. There was a chemical agent here, a compound rare enough that only someone with precise knowledge, someone calculating, could have administered it. Her stomach sank. Poison. Hawk hadn't merely been attacked. He had been engineered to die. The realization sharpened the urgency. This wasn't random violence. This was deliberate. Someone in this room, or someone close, had plotted to kill him under the guise of surgery. Every movement she made now had to account for that fact. Every second weighed against the possibility of sabotage. The guard's restlessness escalated with every flatline. One of them stepped closer to the nurses, rifle tight against his shoulder. Elena's jaw tightened, forcing her hands to steady. Her focus became a razor. Protect the life on the table, protect the staff, and unravel the silent threat that hovered like a shadow over every motion. Her fingers worked with surgical precision, alternating between compressions and defibrillator paddles, each shock synchronized with her internal rhythm. The monitors dipped and spiked, and she noticed the subtle reaction to her adjustments, the way the poison seemed to linger, resisting the natural revival. It was a battle on two fronts, mechanical, chemical, and human. And then, for a brief, terrifying instant, the flatline held. The room froze in collective breath, a suspended heartbeat of fear. Elena's mind raced, racing to calculate the antidote, the maneuver, the timing. Someone had tried to cheat death for Hawk. And now, if she failed, the consequences would cascade beyond the ore. But failure wasn't an option. Not tonight. Elena's hands hovered over the monitors, scanning every line, every flicker of Hawk's fading pulse. Sweat slicked her gloves, her chest rising in sharp, uneven breaths. But something else tugged at her attention, something wrong that had nothing to do with the vitals. Her eyes flicked to the corner of the room, and there he was. Vane, Hawk's right-hand man. The man who should have been pacing, anxious, watching over his boss with the desperate intensity of someone whose empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Instead, he stood unervingly still, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Calm. Too calm. Elena's stomach nodded. That kind of calm didn't belong here. Not in this room, not tonight. The guards moved with mechanical precision, the nurses worked under duress, and the alarms screamed in rhythm with Hawk's heartbeat. But Vane was a statue, a shadow observing a scene he had orchestrated. Her gaze flicked elsewhere, searching for the source of the unease, and something glinted in the trash near the surgical prep table. A syringe. Uncapped, still warm. The vial's label was smudged, illegible at first glance, but the contents glimmered faintly in the harsh overhead light. Elena's breath caught. This wasn't part of the standard for the anesthesia or any emergency medication she had prepared. It shouldn't have been there. Her mind raced, connecting threads too dangerous to verbalize. The blood, the paralytic she had noticed earlier, the flatline. It wasn't an accident. Her pulse spiked as realization hit her like a punch to the chest. The lockdown, the welding of doors, the jamming of signals, the heavy boots filling every corridor. It wasn't to protect Hawk from the police or rivals. It wasn't even to ensure his survival. The lockdown existed to guarantee his death could be controlled, measured, and executed on Vane's terms. Every second of isolation, every armed guard, every suspended elevator, part of a trap. The pieces clicked together in her mind with icy precision. Elena's fingers tightened around the scalpel, hiding the tremor she felt building in her hands. She had to act, but carefully. One wrong motion, one misstep, and Vane would have an excuse to pull the trigger on someone, or worse, on her. Her eyes never left him, watching for the slightest twitch, the almost imperceptible shift of weight that could signal he knew she had seen. Her hands moved back to Hawk's chest, steady outwardly, but her mind spun with strategy. She had to protect the patient, counteract the poison, and neutralize the threat, all without raising suspicion. Every line she traced, every breath she took, became a careful measure against time, against the shadow that had crept into her operating room and refused to leave. Vane's calm was a weapon, and Elena knew, with the clarity that came only when survival hung by a thread, that if she wanted Hawk to live, she couldn't just fight the medical emergency. She had to fight him. The guard's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "We're low on blood. Go. Now." Elena nodded, keeping her expression neutral as she peeled off her outer gloves. Her legs moved before her mind caught up, carrying her out of the ore and into the dim corridor beyond. The lights here were lower, emergency backups casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. The farther she walked from the operating room, the heavier the silence became, broken only by the distant thrum of generators and the echo of her own breathing. The supply closet door creaked open, and she slipped inside, letting it close softly behind her. The room smelled of cardboard and antiseptic, shelves stacked with sealed boxes and red-labeled coolers. Her hands shook as she reached for the blood units, the tremor worse now that no guns were aimed directly at her chest. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cold metal shelf, inhaling slowly, counting her breaths like she'd been taught. In, out, focus. A faint sound made her freeze. A shuffle, a breath that wasn't hers. "Elena," a whisper came from the darkness near the mop sink. She spun, heart hammering. A young intern stepped into the dim light, eyes wide, face pale. He couldn't have been more than 22. Beside him, half hidden behind a cart, crouched an older janitor, his hands clenched tight around something small and black. The janitor lifted it just enough for her to see. A radio, a working one. Elena's pulse roared in her ears. Her first instinct screamed at her to grab it, to call for help, to end this nightmare in one desperate transmission. Police, SWAT, anyone. But the image that followed was immediate and brutal. Armed men flooding the halls, bullets tearing through patients' rooms, nurses caught in the crossfire. Hawk dying on the table. Everyone is paying the price. "We can call," the intern whispered, voice trembling. "I've been hiding here since they came in. The jammers don't reach this far down." Elena stared at the radio, then back at their frightened faces. Her mind raced, weighing lives like fragile glass. Calling now would feel like relief, like escape, but it would be chaos. A massacre. She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." The word tasted like fear and resolve all at once. She took a steadying breath. "If we call now, they'll kill everyone before help even gets inside. We have to wait." The janitor swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" Elena straightened, the answer settling into her bones with terrifying clarity. "We survive," she said quietly. "And I finished the surgery." She took the blood units, her grip firm now. "There's someone in that room who wants Hawk dead. Someone close to him. If I expose him, if I keep Hawk alive long enough, this ends without anyone else dying." The intern looked at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. But fear had sharpened her, stripped her down to what mattered. She met their gazes, steady and unflinching. "Stay hidden," she said. "If things go wrong, then you use the radio. Not before." As she slipped back into the corridor, blood units in hand, Elena felt the weight of the choice settle on her shoulders. She had crossed an invisible line. This wasn't just about saving a life anymore. She wasn't waiting for rescue. She was becoming it. Elena had barely stepped back into the ore when she felt it, the shift in the air, the quiet tightening of the room. Vane had moved closer. He stood at her side now, close enough that she could smell his cologne beneath the antiseptic, something expensive and deliberate. His eyes flicked to the monitors, then to her hands. "How's he doing, doctor?" he asked mildly, as if they were discussing the weather. "Critical," Elena said without looking up. "But stable. For now." Vane nodded, almost approving. He leaned in just enough that his voice dropped, smooth and deadly. Good. Then you understand how fragile things are. His gaze slid to the nurses, the guards, the open chest on the table. Mistakes happen in surgery. No one would question one more. Elena's fingers tightened around the forceps. Her pulse spiked, but her face remained neutral. I don't make mistakes. Vane smiled faintly. Everyone does. Especially when they're distracted. He paused, then added quietly, Your mother still lives on Cedar Row, doesn't she? And your younger brother, late shifts at the depot. The words landed like ice water. For a heartbeat, the room blurred at the edges. Elena forced herself to breathe, slow and controlled, even as fear clawed up her spine. This was it. The threat she'd been dreading, now spoken aloud. You'll slip, Vane continued calmly. During the final stage. A dosage miscalculated. A delay. Hawk doesn't wake up, and this all ends quietly. Cleanly. You walk out alive. Elena finally looked at him. Her eyes were steady, giving nothing away. If I do that, she said carefully, he'll flatline on the table. Your men won't take that well. They'll take it, Vane replied. Because I'll tell them it was you. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Elena nodded once. Just enough. I understand. Vane's smile returned, satisfied. He stepped back, already disengaging, as if the matter were settled. Finish your work, doctor. As soon as he turned away, Elena's mind snapped into motion. Fear sharpened into focus. If Vane was watching, she would give him a performance, but not the ending he expected. She adjusted the four-line, calling out routine instructions, her voice calm, clinical. Beneath the surface, calculations raced. The poison was still active, binding to Hawk's system, suppressing respiration and cardiac response. She couldn't remove it completely, not fast enough. But she could outmaneuver it. She prepared a cocktail of medications under the guise of stabilizing his blood pressure, subtly counteracting the paralytic's effects while masking the change in vitals. A fraction too much epinephrine here. A delayed flush there. To an untrained eye, it would look like deterioration. To Vane, like compliance. Her hands moved with deliberate precision, steady now, the tremor gone. This was no longer just surgery. It was chess. The monitors dipped slightly. A controlled descent. A warning without collapse. Elena heard one of the guards curse under his breath. Vane watched from the corner, unreadable. She leaned closer to Hawk, lowering her voice as if speaking only to the body on the table. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't you dare die yet. This was the narrowest line she had ever walked, keeping a poisoned man alive while convincing his would-be killer that she was letting him die. One misstep, one wrong calculation, and everything would end in blood. But Elena had made her choice, and she was done being afraid. Elena's hands moved with the precision of a metronome, each motion calculated, rehearsed, yet every fiber of her body was screaming in tension. Hawk's chest rose and fell shallowly beneath the bright lights, the monitors flickering like fragile beacons in the storm of the operating room. Around her, the guards shifted restlessly, fingers tight on triggers, eyes darting to every twitch, every flinch. And in the corner, Vane stood, unervingly calm, a predator waiting for the slightest misstep. She had rehearsed this in her mind 1,000 times, but now it had to be perfect. The antidote to the rare poison coursing through Hawk's veins was hidden in a small vial, ready to be administered, but only in a precise sequence. Too fast, and it could trigger a lethal reaction. Too slow, and Hawk's heart would fail before she could intervene. There was no room for hesitation, no margin for error. Her plan was audacious. She would fake a cardiac arrest, force Vane to act, and buy herself the critical seconds to deliver the antidote without arousing suspicion. Elena leaned close to Hawk's chest, listening to the rhythm of the monitors, timing her next move with surgical perfection. With a subtle adjustment of the leads and a careful manipulation of the defibrillator paddles, she simulated the warning signs of an impending crash. The heart monitor screamed as if mocking her, flatlining in sudden, terrifying rhythm, and Vane's eyes snapped to the display. Heart's failing, he said smoothly, voice calm but carrying an edge. He stepped closer, and Elena felt the icy brush of fear ripple through her spine. He expected her to falter now, to panic under the watchful eyes of the armed guards. He expected her to slip. She let a faint tremor show, her pulse quickening audibly, and he leaned over, satisfaction flickering across his expression. But she was still in control. With the other hand, she administered the antidote, a syringe sliding into the foreline with fluid precision. Every second counted, every drop measured. Hawk's pulse wavered, stuttering like a fragile flame, then began to stabilize. The color slowly returned to his lips, his vitals climbing in careful increments. She could feel Vane's eyes on her, suspicious now, but it was too late. She had the upper hand, if only by a fraction of a second. The room seemed to compress and expand all at once, the tension so thick it pressed against her chest. Guards shifted, knives and rifles glinting, unaware of the silent battle she was waging. Elena's hands danced between life and death, each movement precise, each breath synchronized with the rhythm of the antidote flowing into Hawk's system. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Hawk's chest rose a little higher, pulse stronger. The crisis was not over, but for the first time in the night, hope threaded through the chaos. Elena exhaled just slightly, allowing herself the faintest satisfaction that her gamble was working. She had bought the seconds she needed, and if she could maintain the illusion long enough, she would not only save Hawk, she would dismantle the shadow lurking in the room. The monitors beeped, steady now, but every second still felt like a countdown. Elena's mind raced, her hands unwavering despite the storm of fear, adrenaline, and pressure. She was performing the operation of a lifetime, not just on Hawk, but against Vane, and every second she survived brought her closer to turning the tide. Hawk's chest rose and fell steadily now, the monitors beeping a calm, reassuring rhythm that contrasted sharply with the tension still lingering in the room. Elena's hands hovered for a moment, poised over the instruments, her pulse finally slowing just enough to let her think. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his eyes fluttered open. A sharp, calculating light ignited in their depths, and the room seemed to shift on its axis. The predator was awake. Vane's posture stiffened. His calm composure, so carefully maintained, wavered as he realized that the man he had tried to kill, the man he had sought to control through fear and poison, was no longer at his mercy. Hawk's gaze swept the room, landing on Elena, assessing, commanding, aware. The power dynamic had flipped, and for the first time in hours, Vane felt the walls closing in. Elena seized the moment. She leaned slightly toward Hawk, keeping her voice low but firm, the calm authority of a surgeon reclaiming the room. He tried to finish the job, she said, nodding subtly toward Vane. The poison in the syringe. He wanted this to be the end of you. Hawk's eyes sharpened, the faintest twitch of recognition at the words passing over his features. He studied the discarded syringe, now obvious in its placement in the trash, then flicked a glance toward Vane. The tension coiled tighter in the room, a living thing pressing against every chest, every trigger finger, every breath. Vane shifted, trying to mask panic, but it was too late. The game had changed. Elena's voice gained strength as she continued, carefully controlled, her fingers brushing a clean instrument tray to emphasize the evidence she had found. He orchestrated this lockdown, not to protect you, but to make sure he could finish what he started without anyone interfering. Every door welded, every signal jammed, all to isolate you and me. Her gaze never left Vane, sharp and unwavering, a silent warning that she was fully aware. Hawk's eyes narrowed, taking in the details, the subtle signs of sabotage, the timing of the chemical attack, the flatline she had faked to manipulate the traitor. Recognition dawned in his expression, and with it, a cold satisfaction. The predator's instinct returned, and the room seemed to respond, the weight of his authority pressing down like a tide, shifting the balance of fear entirely onto Vane. Vane's jaw tightened. He reached for something, perhaps a weapon, perhaps a last desperate attempt at control, but Hawk's voice cut through, low and commanding, the power of a man who had survived everything. "Step back," he said, each word deliberate, carrying both menace and assurance. The guards paused, uncertain for the first time, and Elena realized she had carved just enough space, just enough leverage, to survive the final confrontation. In that moment, the ore became a crucible of truth and power. Elena, once trembling under the weight of guns and guilt, had guided the events to this precise point. Hawk, now fully awake and aware, was ready to reclaim control. The shadow that Vane had cast over the room began to dissolve. For the first time that night, Elena could breathe, knowing that the predator she had saved was no longer just a patient. He was the key to ending the threat she had faced in every heartbeat, every decision, and every calculated move of the night. The sound of metal grinding echoed down the corridors as the welds on the hospital doors were finally cut, a slow, deliberate surrender to the shifting power in the building. Guards who had once loomed over every hallway relaxed their shoulders, though some eyes still darted nervously. Hawk's loyalists moved through the hospital with precision, sweeping the remaining pockets of resistance aside, their presence a reminder that the balance of control had tipped irrevocably. Vane was dragged through the doors, his calm mask shattered, replaced by a mixture of fury and disbelief. Elena watched silently as the traitor was pulled into the night, the faint echo of his protests swallowed by the darkened streets beyond. For a moment, the tension that had gripped the hospital for hours seemed to lift, replaced by a hollow quiet, the kind that comes after storms when the air feels charged with both relief and the weight of what is past. Hawk, still on the table, his chest finally steady, turned his gaze toward Elena. There was no warmth, no softness. He was a predator, always calculating, always alert, but there was respect, a recognition that transcended fear or obligation. She had saved him, yes, but more than that, she had seen through the trap, acted decisively, and kept every life in the ore intact. To him, that was worth more than any conventional debt. He leaned back slightly, the monitors ticking beside him like metronomes in the quiet room. "You've earned a favor," he said, voice low and controlled, carrying the weight of power that had turned the city inside out. Elena's pulse quickened, not with fear this time, but with clarity. She had already faced the worst of him, had stared into the abyss of his world, and emerged not broken, but whole. Her mind worked through the possibilities, the requests he could make, the obligations she might incur, but the answer had crystallized hours ago, amidst the chaos of blood, poison, and gunmetal. She met his eyes steadily, the tremor that had haunted her all night gone, replaced by the resolve that had carried her through every dangerous second. "No favors," she said, voice firm. "I want one thing." Hawk's brow lifted slightly, curiosity flickering in the depths of his dark eyes. "And that is your permanent exit from this hospital," Elena said, her words slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "No presence, no influence. My patients, my staff, they are not collateral. You stay away." A long silence followed, thick and heavy, until Hawk's lips curved into the faintest, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of approval. He inclined his head, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Elena had not only survived the night, she had set the terms of her own safety, asserting authority in a world built on fear and obedience. The hospital hummed softly around them, the monitors, the breathing machines, the subtle echoes of footsteps, all reclaiming their rhythm. Hawk's loyalists had secured the corridors, and the threat that had stalked the ore for hours was gone. Elena stepped back from the table, hands clean now, though her knuckles still ached from the tension. She had faced the monster, manipulated the predator's rules, and emerged with control over her own space. For the first time in years, she felt the fragile, exhilarating weight of freedom, and she intended to hold on to it. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of St. Jude's, washing the hospital in pale gold that made the white tiles glow like frost. The hum of machines was softer now, almost ordinary, and the harsh tension of the night seemed to linger only in the quiet echo of footsteps and the faint metallic scent that clung stubbornly to the air. Outside, police cars lined the street, lights flashing and radios crackling, but the city's most feared presence had vanished as if it had never been there at all. Hawk and his men were gone, leaving only questions and the faintest shadow of power in their wake. Elena stood at the scrub sink, water running over her hands. She stared at them, perfectly still, watching the tremor that had haunted her for years finally dissipate. For the first time, she didn't see hesitation, fear, or doubt. Only the hands of a woman who had done the impossible. Each finger was precise, calm, and unshakable. The reflection in the stainless steel mirror above the sink showed a surgeon transformed. Eyes sharp, shoulders squared, a quiet strength emanating from every line of her face. The events of the night replayed in her mind in flashes. The flat line, the poison, the tension that had pressed like a physical weight on every heartbeat. The choices she had made, the risk, the deception, the courage it had taken to act while the world seemed ready to collapse around her, had brought her here. Not just to survival, but to mastery over her own fear. Footsteps echoed in the hall, and a nurse peeked in, eyes wide, still unsure if the nightmare had truly ended. Elena offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that it was over, that she had navigated the chaos with skill and nerve. She didn't need their praise. She only needed the quiet proof of her own strength, and the knowledge that she had protected everyone who had depended on her. The monitors beside the empty or beeped rhythmically, a stark contrast to the alarms that had filled the air just hours before. Hawk's absence was a strange kind of relief. His threat had been enormous, but his disappearance meant that the city's darkness, at least for now, would not reach these halls. Elena inhaled deeply, the antiseptic tang mingling with the morning air, and let herself feel the rare luxury of peace. She turned from the sink, letting her gaze sweep the hospital she had defended, the corridors now quiet and reclaiming their ordinary rhythm. Every room she passed whispered of life saved, danger averted, and choices made in the shadow of fear. She had faced a monster, manipulated power, and emerged not broken, but strengthened. Elena paused at the doorway, the sun catching her silhouette, casting a long shadow that stretched across the tile floor. She was no longer just a surgeon. She was a survivor, a woman who had stared down the city's most dangerous predator and lived. The tremor in her hands was gone, replaced by a steadiness she had never known, a proof of resilience that no fear, no threat, and no darkness could take away. For the first time in years, she felt unshakable.